Hello, nerds! Thank you for watching Generally Nerdy. This is your week in Nerdom Supplemental Edition. And for those of you that don't know, generally speaking, Supplemental is where we talk about everything else. If it doesn't fall into one of the other 5 categories, then it'll go in here. If one of the other categories comes up short and it doesn't justify making a whole video, it'll come in here. Or if there's really cool happenings across the YouTubes, then we'll talk about them here, or just really anything. I'm going to start doing, probably next week, I'm going to start doing updates, because I've been doing Supplemental at a different time as the rest of the videos. So everything that I don't catch in the videos from the rest of the week, if it's super important, can't wait until next week to talk about, it'll go into Supplemental. This week's going to be a little different, a little change of form. We're only talking about 2 topics. The first of which is going to be the video games, the violent video games issue. That's really not an issue, but is apparently a hot button subject with the mass populace now that the Florida shooting has happened. So much so that President Trump had a meeting about it yesterday, but we'll get into that. And then we're also going to do our Black Panther conversation. I didn't do a review of this movie, so you can probably consider this that as well.
Quiet on the set, rolling.
Hi, I am Bitsy Telek.
Hey, I'm Hale Appleman.
I'm Walter Kane.
I'm Rene Aubergenois. Odo on Deep Space Nine.
Michael Dorn, Lieutenant Commander Worf, Star Trek The Next Generation.
Come and see me and hear me and talk to me and listen to me talk about myself.
Hey man, this is Kevin Smith, often considered generally nerdy, and you are listening to what is often considered generally nerdy.
On Generally Nerdy.
You're listening to
Generally Nerdy.
Generally Nerdy.
Generally Nerdy.
Okay, first things first, we're talking about the violent video games and Trump sitting down with industry types and people at the forefront, or however they're billing it. It was kind of a misnomer. Now, they did have, as part of this meeting, they did have the head of Take-Two Entertainment, which does I forget which games they do off the top of my head. I don't have my notes here. I'm kind of freestyling today. So they had the lead of Take-Two, the head of Take-Two. They had the head of Rockstar Games. So some actual industry types. There were a couple others that were legit. There were a bunch of, it sounded like staunch Republican types, a bunch of conservative types that are, video games are the devil to begin with. And then they had, for their authority on the topic, they had 3 researchers who are consistently, their research has consistently been disproven and shown to be overly biased and shown to be not scientific. And these are who they brought in as experts in the field. So right off the bat, it's like a Senate hearing, like when they did when the PMRC was a thing, and they did the censoring on music, where the parental advisory sticker became a thing. That whole, it looks like it's gearing up to be like that, in that the cats who are from the industry are going to have to defend themselves. No one, or the ESRB, that was the other one. Someone from the ESRB is going to be present, or was present yesterday when it happened. So they don't have any actual video game researchers. They don't have any of the people who have done the numerous decades-long studies on the effects of video games on people and video games on culture and so on and so forth. They just have people gunning for the video game industry, and then they also have a couple of guys from the video game industry to defend it. We're gonna talk about, once the results of this meeting are made more public, we're going to talk about those probably in next week's supplemental, but it won't be dedicated to it. It won't be a whole episode dedicated to it. But just, we gotta weigh in on this, because we talk about gaming, and obviously one of my favorite games is one of the reasons why a ratings system exists for video games in general. Back in, it was like 97, It was Mortal Kombat 2. So right about that time is no, it was the shift from 1 to 2. So yeah, 96, 97, somewhere in that neighborhood is when the ratings board, the video games rating board came into effect, the ESRB, the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, and it's due largely to the fact that Mortal Kombat was so gory and so and even by today's standards was really, really tame. But still, it caused a hubbub. There were a plethora of other games. Mortal Kombat was just the biggest. So I understand the need for a rating system. Ratings are not censorship. Ratings are letting you know. Ratings are trigger warnings. Let's put it that way. And our culture right now is such that that's necessary. Our culture kind of has always been that way, at least for the last 5 decades, 6 decades. So like that kind of makes sense. I've grown up in a culture where we got to know what we're getting into before we get into it, so that we don't have any shocks. We don't have any difficult conversations with the kids, that kind of stuff. And I get it. That makes sense. But the thing that has me scared is that it's already they're blaming this Florida shooting, the Valentine's Day Florida shooting. They're blaming it on video games. Just like the gun thing, this is a little less of a witch hunt because there is an entire, well, I mean, even guns, there's an entire industry to defend it, but the games are a little more indirect. Whereas the gun was in the guy's hand, the game is something that, in their scenario, the game is something that put the thought in his head to do it, which is total bullshit. If violent video games caused people to conduct mass shootings, then at the very, very least, Japan would have 10 times more the mass shootings as America, because in Japan they have a very widespread issue, an epidemic, the otaku epidemic. Otaku is in some cases is worn as a badge of honor. Somebody refers to themselves as an otaku, but it's gotten to a level where enough people qualify as. So before I kind of go further, let me explain to you what otaku is, because I'm sure some of you don't know. Otaku in Japanese culture is somebody who is a shut-in, is somebody who doesn't leave their house if they don't have to. And with the advancements of modern technology, there are very, very few reasons to leave the house aside from health reasons. And being as the health benefit of being in direct sunlight is not immediately seen, is not something that can be quantized very fast. It's not seen as necessary. So otaku, generally speaking, are Japanese guys, stereotypically, who shut themselves in and play video games. They work from home. They do not leave the house. And I'm totally putting this in layman's terms. There's a little bit more nuance to it, but for the purpose of our conversation right now, that's what you need to know about otaku. There is a difference between Japanese otaku and American otaku, but we're not going there. So because of that, because it has reached epidemic levels, like the Japanese government is trying to entice young men into leaving their house so that they can communicate with females, so that they can reproduce, so that there is another generation to keep their culture alive and thriving, because their population is starting to decline because of the otaku epidemic. So if violent video games caused that, if violent video games were the reason that we have mass shootings, then Japan would, their population would decline much more sharply, because they would have many, many more mass shootings than we do. Another point to consider in this is gun deaths. There would be a lot more gun deaths in this country. You consider obesity kills millions of people a year. And gun deaths, mass shootings included, and suicide death by gun included, we hit about 30,000 roughly every year. That's including suicides, which I would imagine you're not trying to link to video games, and all mass shootings. We're hitting right about 30,000 a year. That's a CDC statistic. So it's I think in 2016, which was the last time they did they have data for, we were at like 32,000, and the year before that was a little bit lower, and the year before that was a little bit higher. So yeah, we're right about 30,000. It's not an epidemic. That's unfortunate. That is very, very sad. That is very, very horrible that anyone dies unnaturally. But it's not because of video games. And it's not because of guns. We have a culture in the society where we're super reactionary to the minority. And if I go any further, we're gonna start talking in circles, and I'll probably get super upset about it. So we're just gonna move on. So then our next bit is Black Panther. Like I said in the intro, I didn't do a review for Black Panther. I did see it. I really enjoyed the movie. So if you're looking for that much information, there you go. It's a great movie as far as popcorn fodder goes, and as far as story goes. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's not great, and that's the part we're going to talk about right now. Director Ryan Coogler is talking about coming back for the next one. There is obviously going to be a next one. There's likely going to be a trilogy made. So that's not news. That's expectation. The conversation that we need to have is the diversity of Black Panther. I saw entirely too many articles praising the movie for its diversity. Now, let me restate. I thought this was a good movie. This is top 5 Marvel movies. Actually, probably top 3 Marvel movies, top 5 superhero movies that you can see. Maybe top 8 superhero movies. I think Logan might be bumping it out just a little bit. But either way, it's a good movie. It's of the ilk in which it is placed. It is one of the part of the cream that rises to the top. That's mixed metaphors on you. It's not diverse. In the grand scheme of Hollywood and in the grand scheme of superhero movies, a little bit more specifically, it diversifies the conversation. It diversifies the landscape. The movie itself is 90% black, which means it's not diverse. By definition, it is not diverse. It is the opposite of diverse. Again, if you want to reference the larger conversation, if you want to reference the landscape as a whole, then absolutely, it diversifies Hollywood. It diversifies the options for you to go see movies in the theater. Part of this issue also is I saw comments and tweets about, oh, this is what white kids feel like all the time, is they get to identify. I identify with T'Challa in this movie. That's what creates a good movie, is that it has a broad appeal so that multiple types of people can identify with your protagonist. And sure, it helps if the skin tone of the protagonist is the same as mine, but it is not a requirement. It is not necessary for me to identify with a protagonist. It's not uncommon to identify with a female protagonist for me, like the Sarah Connor not Sarah Connor Chronicles, different Summer Glau show, Firefly. the character in that I identify with the most was Summer Glau, was River. Because of her isolationism and because she was a lot more intelligent than she let on, than anyone really knew, because they just thought she was crazy. That was something that spoke to me more than any of the other characters on there, more than Mal, more than Wash, more than the Bishop, more than any other character. I identified with Summer Glau in that show. I am not in the minority here. Maybe specifically in this example I am, but it's not, the reference I'm making is I'm not in the minority in that I don't have to look like the protagonist in order to identify with them. One of my all-time favorite books is a book called The Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson. It is post-cyberpunk at its purest and most amazing, and the protagonist of that book is a young girl, like 13, through a fair chunk of the story, and I identified with her more than any other character in that story, primarily because like 70% of the book is about her, but it's still, she's not my age, and she's definitely not my gender, and I identified with her. I could feel the pain and the struggle that she was going through in the story. So to say that young black children, not even male or female, young black kids can't identify with someone on screen is, again, selling them short. We as a culture, we do this thing where we automatically assume that people are putting themselves in a box, and in so doing, we put them in a box. Yes, it is great to diversify the conversation. That always makes for a better conversation, but to say that we don't have the imagination to identify with somebody who doesn't look like us sells us short. And I feel like somebody on the other side of the aisle, as far as ethnicity, would, if you broke it down, would agree with me. In that, sure, it's easier to identify with someone who looks like me. But that's not to say it's difficult to identify with somebody who doesn't. And that's my issue. A great movie. Let's not forget that it's a great movie. They do more for character development for their villain, though there's let me do one criticism about the movie, because I do legitimately have, well, there's a couple of minor criticisms, but one major criticism about this movie is they killed Killmonger. They Star Wars'd that. My biggest issue with the prequel trilogy of Star Wars is that they killed their villain in every movie. Whereas in the Holy Trilogy, you have the same two villains through all three movies. In the Black Panther mythos, Killmonger's a recurring foe. I don't know enough about Black Panther to say that he is his nemesis, or that he is, a major player in the villainy, but I do know he comes back, and Black Panther always has an issue defeating him because he is a strong villain. We made him stronger in this movie, I feel like, than he is in the comic books, and then we killed him off. So all of that headway that they made with making another villain that's better than Loki, because legit, that's how that turned out, until he died. And then we're back to Loki's the best villain that Marvel has in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. One might argue that for a second Winter Soldier fit that role as well, but now Winter Soldier's technically a good guy, so he's not a villain anymore. So he kind of got killed as well. So that's just, I want to live in a world where the cinematic universe of a comic book mirrors the comic book universe, in that we have story arcs, but we don't have to destroy the villain in order to end the arc. We don't have to kill the villain in order to end the arc. So thank you guys for listening to my ramblings. I very much appreciate it. What did I miss? I mean, obviously, let's just talk about these 2 points, because this wasn't really news, this was more conversation pieces. So let's talk about these 2 points down in the comments section. If you want to go even deeper into that conversation, you want to follow me on the social medias, or you just want to enter the contest, because we are having that t-shirt contest still throughout this whole month. Then jump over to the website, generallynerdy.net. You can do all of that stuff over there. If you want to support the channel, go to Patreon, patreon.com/generallynerdy. That's how you can support very directly. If you're falling behind on your nerd news and you want to catch up, then definitely click or tap that box to the left of my face to do that. But before you go, always remember that if it's generally nerdy, it's probably here.